Time and again, the world bears witness to truths seldom said. Lend an ear. We promise enlightened, informed conversation. My name is Robert, and this is Seldom Said, the place where conversation matters. Welcome back. The program's called Seldom Said, the place where conversation matters. My name is Robert. It's rather seldom, I would think, checking my own chronology, approximately 2 or 3 more times, that I've had a guest back, but there are times where the guest speaks to an issue that's relevant in the present time, and there are times where that guest is very impressive in presenting his case. Our guest today is Mr. Jeff Clayton, the Executive Director of the American Bail Coalition. Welcome to Seldom Said, Jeff.
Thanks for having me on again, Robert. It's always a pleasure.
It's our pleasure, I can assure you. Can you give us a little précis of your activity since our last interview?
Absolutely. So, we're continuing to go to state capitals and local governments to discuss the issue of bail reform. But something kind of big has happened this year, which is that the New York bail reform law took effect in January. And so we're seeing, all kinds of news articles and stories about what's happening there. And then the other thing that, and we can get more into this, is that this conversation on this risk assessment, pretrial risk assessment algorithm is continuing to change as we go forward. And so, it's been the same things I've been doing before, just trying to continue to get our message out.
It seems rather difficult to precisely put one's finger on a policy that states agree upon. I know New York seems to be in incredible flux. Do you find that government really has not done its job in precisely defining what bail should be?
I think so, and it varies tremendously by state. And you go to some states and they want to make the bail system more difficult on defendants and put more electronic monitors on them and higher bails. Expanding preventative detention, meaning detention without bail for some cases. Like we've got several bills in Alabama that would just deny bail, altogether. And then you've got other state governments that are saying, hey, let's just not make anybody post bail and, until you're convicted that, you'll never be held in jail. And what it's really driven by, Robert, and having gone back into bail history, back to the year 51 AD, there's just no understanding of what the purpose of bail is. And I have determined that we've been having this conversation, for 2,000 years and we still haven't resolved it. But I think if you don't understand the history, you just go with the label cash bail is bad and proceed from there. And that's really not a good way to understand what's going on.
It would seem that to understand bail at all, one would have to presuppose what the penalty for a crime should be. Do you agree that we really haven't precisely defined the different qualities and quantities of bail given the precise nature of a crime?
Yeah, I think so. And obviously bail is not supposed to be punitive. But at the same time, and this was an example that I got out of Missouri, is that a current representative, when he was a prosecutor, was trying a case, and the maximum potential penalty on the case was 30 days. Well, the gentleman had been in jail for 120 days prior to trial. And so his argument was, well, maybe we should cap some of these situations where, can we really, is it punitive to hold somebody for 120 days when they only, are going to be held for 30 days? And of course, I told somebody else that on the conservative side, and their argument was, well, why would they even be there in the first place if it's only a 30-day potential penalty? And so, I think we need to kind of straighten out what the penalties are and then kind of make the bail system fit better in terms of that, unlike it does now.
Do you feel that there's the potential for a great many lawsuits on the part of individuals who feel they've been ineffectively tried or racially blockbusted for some reason?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we've certainly seen some of those. The one I just read about in New York a few moments ago was that, ICE rigged the algorithm to make it more difficult for immigrants to get out of jail. So there's always, and unfortunately, and I hate to say this because I grew up in a law enforcement family, but unfortunately, there are abuses by the state and the police. And luckily, I can draw from my own Scots-Irish heritage of hating the government to help me kind of reconcile all that. But it happens, unfortunately. And we need defendants to be able to sue the state to get it right, to force the changes that need to happen.
In your overview of the national situation, Jeff, have you come across a circumstance where you say, all right, they're on the right track. This is something I can feel amenable toward. This is something with potential.
I think so. And really what it's been is using the criminal justice system as a collections mechanism. The idea that we're going to have criminal defendants pay for their own prosecution, pay for their own pretrial supervision, pay for their bail, pay for restitution, pay for their own probation, pay for fines, fees, costs, restitution, and surcharges, and all this stuff, and that we're going to fund the criminal justice system off of them is a problem. And so any reforms that I've seen where the system is pushing back on that, I think is appropriate because, look, these people are flawed in the first place, unfortunately, right? They have issues. That's why they commit crimes. And the idea that they can just behave like a normal citizen and all of a sudden write a check is stupid. And in fact, I said that at a conference of judges and got a standing ovation. So everybody knows these people have problems and are messed up in a certain way. And the idea that we're just going to extract money out of them to run, the dragnet back on them, it just doesn't make any sense.
Someone recently shared with me his thought as a psychologist that crime was an aberration, a mental aberration of the psyche, and in a sense to try and convict someone of something they're not able to stop is a violation of their inalienable right just to be a person. Is that overdoing it?
Probably. I mean, I think, and that's always a tough call in these cases of not guilty by reason of insanity or, you're incompetent to proceed is, when you can actually form the mental capacity to commit the crime. And, there's a difference, I think, between evil and mental illness. But those issues are really hard to figure out as to when somebody should be criminally culpable. Now, I think if we look at it in the larger kind of picture of the history of this country and the way things are set up, is that people who get into crime typically come from bad situations, whether it's a bad neighborhood, a bad area, or segregated housing and all that stuff. And that's not to say, obviously the old saying is that the biggest criminals in America wear suits and ties. That's so it's not all of it, right? There's obviously embezzlement and all this sort of thing, but the vast majority of these situations, violent crimes, homicides, all this sort of thing is driven by that and our inability to fix the housing segregation problem that I feel is sort of a legacy of slavery. And as I tell people around the country, if you don't change the inputs, the situation of people going into the criminal justice system, we can't change the outputs. And so there's only so much we can do in criminal justice reform to fix the underlying issues.
There are a number of people, ex-President Obama amongst them, who say that we've never really totally understood or had the proper discussion of the inherent qualities of slavery and what it's done to the country at large. Do you feel there's never been a proper discussion of the bail situation, the judicial system, and race?
I think so. I think, in looking back at the history of bail, this concept of dangerousness, right, that we're going to assess people as dangerous or treat them as dangerous, really was a product of the 1960s. Dangerousness was never an issue in terms of bail up until that time. It was simply appearance. Now, I think the entire criminal justice system suffers from what you said, and I agree, which is a lack of conversation about slavery. And there's really two things that struck me about this. One is that, as Martin Luther King said, when the Civil War ended and the slaves were freed, 40 acres and a mule didn't apply to them. In other words, they had no opportunity to leave the East Coast, the South, and move to the West like all the other settlers did and get free land and get the ability to do all that. And certainly some of them did, but the vast majority of former slaves either continued in their current situation or moved to the industrial centers of the North. So I don't think we ever really reconciled that. The other thing that really struck me is research that I've seen that people who are not from slave backgrounds but are still African Americans perform better. They do better. And so you would say, is it simply the color of the skin that we're looking at here, or is there something deeper? And I think the answer is there is something deeper because, like my nephew was adopted from Africa. He's African American. He's from Ethiopia. He's going to probably do better than those who descended from slaves for some reason. And at least the research will show that. And I think that shows that we've got to do a much better job on this. And there has to be some fundamental change. And I can tell you right now, Robert, it's not going to come from the criminal justice system. That's not going to fix it.
Your nephew, I must say that I have interracial children in my own family. Do you feel that it is the inherent need of every parent, or in your case, uncle, or in my case, grandfather, to give that talk to an individual of different pigment as to how they should react and act in the presence of law enforcement?
He's a little too young for that now, but I probably, will explain it to him at some point, which is, look, Uncle Jeff's a lawyer. So just do what the police say for now, and we'll work all this out later. But if you're from a bad neighborhood, you don't understand that. You just are taught that the police are a tool of oppression, unfortunately, which, in certain cases, can certainly be the case. So, but for now with him, I just try to make him have a normal life. He loves going ice fishing and fishing. So I take him ice fishing and just try to have him be a normal kid fitting in. And obviously, he's from an athletic background. So, his first soccer game, he scored 4 goals because he's faster than all the other kids. So there's definitely differences between him and the other kids. And I think he realizes it. But at this point, I think, he's not in a bad neighborhood. He's out in the suburbs of Denver. And so his whole perception of this system is going to be different when he gets older. And certainly I'm going to talk to him about all that and how we got here and what it all means.
Do you feel that an understanding of that heritage should be part of every school system and every curriculum? Absolutely.
Absolutely. And I talk to a lot of people as I travel throughout the country. And so one night I decided I was going to make the case for reparations. And I made a pretty compelling case. Now, then I sort of, took a little bit of heat the next day for saying that might be an extreme position. But is it really an extreme position? And maybe it's not. We write everybody a check who can prove that they, came from enslaved populations. But, we were able to do this with the Native American populations and, at least let them have some land and put them, in a little bit of a better situation. So something's got to give here. And whether it's free college, something, there has to be some way to sort of give these people the economic opportunities that they deserve and give them a head start of getting into these economies. Because if we don't, we're going to be talking about this for another 100 years. And somehow other countries are able to fix this, and we just can't seem to be able to do that.
Indeed. I do a great deal of work in regard to an indigenous population on the reservation. Their solutions seem to be separation, living within and yet without. Do you feel that is possible in regard to neighborhoods?
Yeah, my view is that, all of America should be where any of Americans should live. And, I think it's okay if people, want to live with people of common heritage. That's fine. But I think the bigger goal would be to have a multicultural society where none of this matters, where, my Scots-Irish heritage of hating the government can go right along with somebody else's heritage. And we can all say we're all Americans. And frankly, I heard another argument, and, this is not popular, but somebody who was not from the United States, which said, why don't we just facilitate the move of these people back to Africa? And of course, that's a no-no to say in the United States. But frankly, it's wrong, because the African-American people that came to this country are every bit as American as I am. And to say that they aren't, I think, would be the first mistake. So my view is we need a multicultural society, multiracial society, and we should all be comfortable living next to whoever it is living next to us.
I'm bringing up a memory in my own mind as you say that. I am of Italian heritage. My father was a member of the Knights of Columbus. We marched in the St. Pat's Parade. We ended up at a local Irish tavern, McSorley's, eating pizza. And there was something about the quality of everything and anything under one label. With all of these examples you've raised and talking about the possibilities of one society, some sociologists argue that that will not happen until we have a society that's miscegenate, until we have society that is so interrelational that race does not matter. Is that naivete?
No, I think there's probably something to that, over time people will forget where they came from, although perhaps maybe the advent of, Ancestry.com and DNA tests maybe will continue to remind us. And kind of a funny story, a friend of mine was assessed 1% Asian, which they later changed to say he wasn't Asian. So for about a year, he was all into Asian culture and claiming that his wife was discriminating against him because he was Asian. But, I think you're right. I mean, I think there's got to be, intermarriages of people of different races and cultures over time, different relationships, children being born of mixed races before this will ever go away. And right now, I think that's starting to happen. But, and particularly of people who were not did not descend from former slaves, other ethnic populations. And certainly everybody would just say white is white. And we all know it's not. There's Italians, there's, Irish and all that. But that label amongst white people seems to have gone away. So, I'm optimistic, but I still think we have got to do something about, those who descended from former slaves. We know that's a problem that we haven't solved.
Everything must begin with that proverbial one step. What do you feel is the most significant step that has to be attempted and attained by government at the present time?
For me, it's housing. I mean, if I was advising President Trump, I would have him on a steamroller in the south side of Chicago and rebuilding the neighborhood, getting rid of terrible housing units, and finding opportunity for people to move to another neighborhood, to rebuild the south side into something else. But it's housing. I mean, you go to Trenton, New Jersey, go down there and tell me that that's a good place for somebody to grow up. You go to some of these neighborhoods and it's terrible. And we can't allow that to happen anymore in this country. And so I think that's the answer, is that, we've got to end housing segregation. I know that's a big statement to make, and, I'm not, privy to all the solutions, but I know that's what has to happen.
We're within a minute of our first break, and these things always go by rather quickly, Jeff. One of the things that comes up constantly, especially in the city of New York, and I'll just posit this question, then we'll return to it after the break, the questions of neighborhoods. I do remember people blockbusting neighborhoods, knocking them down, putting up projects and claiming they were vertical neighborhoods, and they were not. They were simply breeding grounds for crime and dislocation. I wonder if, in understanding the law, we have to understand a measure of architectural necessity as to what we can do in urban areas and how we can in some way create a circumstance where people know the person next door and they can live in a community and a sense of community rather than simply having to go downstairs, the story being told of individuals who are afraid to take the elevator in the projects in Brooklyn. It's the question I'd like to come back to after our first break. We'll take that now. My name is Robert. The program is Seldom Said.
You're listening to a podcast from LIU Studios. If you like what you're hearing, please leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts and subscribe to this show on your podcast app of choice. For more of our programs or to support LIU Studios, visit WCWP.org.
This is Seldom Said with Robert Amato.
Welcome back. My name is Robert. The program is Seldom Said, the place where conversation matters. Our special guest, Jeff Clayton, the Executive Director of the American Bail Coalition. Jeff, the question we posited before the break, I do remember being in a project recently, waiting for the elevator, waiting with an elderly couple who were terrified to enter the elevator with me. With me as a Caucasian, I would wonder how they felt if there was a racial distinction there. I find myself more and more, when considering law, to consider sociology. Do you feel that the law is not as understanding of culture as it should be?
Yeah, I think so. And I think we haven't really adapted to the modern era. A professor of mine at the University of Rochester said that if you go back in the history of politics over thousands of years, it's always been urban versus rural. And why? Because the urban centers was where banking happened, where the finest foods were, where the culture was. And now I think that's changed. I think, with the advent of the internet, telephones, all this sort of thing, there's really no reason to live in a big city, really, when it comes down to it, other than lack of affordable housing somewhere else. And the idea that you've always lived in the city, that your family has lived in the city. So I think that is one big shift that's happened that the law needs to take into account. And the other thing is that, the law does come from the English aristocratic tradition. I mean, our system's based on English common law. And so I think it's slow to recognize that there's different viewpoints. And, that's not to say that the Constitution as a founding document is fundamentally flawed, but I think our understanding of rights really hasn't changed as quickly with the times as perhaps it should.
Recently, I spent some personal time with an individual who had served 35 years behind bars, and speaking to the individual, trying to find some common sense of how that individual could step into society and understand its needs and responsibilities. Do you feel that education should be part of the system?
Yeah, and so I started my whole concept with prison, thinking about prisons and prison reforms with a joke that I went on a media show and said that if you want to fix the system, you should call Tom Bodette from Motel 6. He could create for $39.99 a night, he could put a fence around a Motel 6 and we could call it prison. But the effect of that would, and I thought it was hilarious at the time, but as I began to think about it, it occurred to me, what is the need for prison? There's two reasons, right? To punish someone and to segregate them from the rest of society. Because we want to segregate them from the rest of society does not mean we have to put them in a cage all the time. I don't think it does. And I think that's the antithesis of any ability to have rehabilitation, because their life is so turned upside down. On the other hand, if they were living in a small apartment, they were educating themselves, and there were technical and other educational programs, and we could teach them how to learn to live a normal life, what we would consider a normal life, that would be much more effective. Because the reality is, these people who come out of prison are not well equipped to jump into the workforce. Part of the reason they had to get into the crime situation in the first place is they never had the ability to live what we would consider a normal life, have a job, do your job, have a family, have a stable housing situation, all these sorts of things. And I think that would be the number one change I would make is, look, yeah, obviously there's the Hannibal Lecter folks that we need to keep in, the deep, dark state prisons and the supermaxes and all that. But for the vast majority of these people, they need help. And, punishment of removing them from society is enough. And I don't think putting them in a cage and punishing them gets any better results or makes anybody in society feel any better about it.
Do you feel then, Jeff, that the population at large is the area that should be focused upon? The people who are outside have to be in some way educated to understand what it's like to be inside.
I do. I don't, if you've never been in a jail or prison, you don't get it. And you got to ask yourself why. If these people are a danger to a guard, danger to another inmate, or they have some, psychological problems where they just can't get along, why are we doing that? We keep them in these pods. We let them, go out and play basketball and all this stuff. That's fine. But, it's really dehumanizing in my view. And, some might argue, hey, they deserve it. They, harmed somebody and they deserve it. But, punishment is one thing. I think rehabilitation is another. And as the shift from punishment to rehabilitation is still in process. Some folks believe there should be no rehabilitation, but for my money, prison is dehumanizing. If we don't let people see that, then there will never be any change.
How do you respond to those politically today who talk about prisons as simply an example of retribution?
Well, I think it is. I think it's punishment. That's what the law has said. In fact, the first African-American lawyer judge to ever reach the Court of Appeals level, Judge Amalia Kearse, wrote in an opinion that the purpose of the criminal justice system is to define what the crimes are and punish those who commit the crimes. And that's it. But I think that view is an older view. And it is retributive in the sense that, yeah, we're paying you back for what you did to somebody. But at the end of the day, if you ask your average person on the street what they really want, if they're a victim of the crime, the answer is restitution, right? And I'm obviously a reader of the Bible, but it's paying your debt is what it has always been defined as, right? You're paying your debt to society. And so it's known as this concept of debt. And for me, that is, you cause damage that you need to try to undo, more so than it's productive to say, okay, we'll send you to prison for 10 years. This person lost hundreds of thousands of dollars as a result of your actions. But the reality is we're going to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars punishing them rather than equipping them to repay and make good on what they did. So, it is retributive, and I think we need to rethink the way that we do all this.
The whole idea of risk assessment, it would seem that we're trying to find the guilt quotient on a graph. Can you, Jeff, summarize in a few minutes the arguments pro and con and what the inherent weakness of risk assessment is?
Well, as you said, that's exactly what it does. It, gives somebody a score of how risky they are. I think assessing somebody's future dangerousness, and in the same opinion that I just cited from Judge Kurtz, what she says is we punish people for what they have done, not for what they may do in the future. We don't do that. And so the current risk assessment would say, well, we need to treat people differently based on what they may do in the future, which kind of makes sense to folks, in the criminal justice system, which is, hey, we need to apply the resources to, supervising, incarcerating, rehabilitating the high-risk defendants, right? Because we think they're going to all do it again. On the other hand, does the risk methodology create an endless cycle for people that they can't get out of? And the answer is yes. Research from Rice University has shown that these tools of labeling people as dangerousness is sort of like a criminal scarlet letter from which you cannot escape and which is like a snowball over time. The more you do it, the more risky you become. And so, Professor Wirth's argument is these risk tools and this risk methodology is why we have generational mass incarceration. And I have to agree with them. That is, we've seen that. And I think this risk methodology and embedding it into our criminal justice system is the reason.
The Pretrial Justice Institute and their rationale for reversing a hardcore issue they had defended over the years, was there any rationale for that? Did you see it coming? They haven't offered any alternatives, indeed, in regard to what they're doing.
They haven't offered any alternatives. Did I see it coming? Yes, I did. And it was really, and we talked about this in 2018 when, the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights, the NAACP and the ACLU said, hey, we got problems with these. There's validity problems and problems of racial bias. We knew the end was inevitable at some point. And I think they probably just got tired of me criticizing them for, the hundreds of, well, maybe not hundreds of millions, but millions of dollars over the last generation they've spent to embed these very risk assessments. And so, I don't like to use the phrase blood on their hands, but I mean, they're the ones that spread all this. The Arnold Foundation gave them grants. Everybody gave them grants to spread all this. And so, I don't want to kind of dwell on that much, but I think they have an obligation to undo the mess that they've caused. And they should be doing that. And unfortunately, they're not. And I think the other problem is that they've lost credibility now because, they pushed this for so far. Now they realized it was wrong and nobody really trusts them anymore. And so that's a problem. But, I think they made the right decision. I think they realized that there were problems of validity and racial bias. And what is this really doing for us? It hasn't decarcerated. And that's what we learned through the last generation is that these don't have any effect. And academic research backs us up on this point that they didn't decarcerate the jails. So I think they made the right decision. And, I hope they'll work hard to undo the damage they caused.
In our discussion, are we coming to that point where we have to admit that we have to settle for the best possible scenario? That the idea of good, bad, indifferent, success, and failure are non sequiturs when we're talking about the rational possibility on the street?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think, we've got to completely push the reset button on this whole bail reform and labeling people as risk in the pretrial phase. And that also goes for supervision policies. And as we've discussed before, if people are presumed innocent, then why are we going to send them to be on probation while they're pending trial, right? So there's many more issues I think that we need to get into going forward.
New York is discussing publicly the idea of cash or unconditional release. Both seem to be extreme positions that don't have a basis in fact. Where does one stand in regard to having cash bail or simply unconditionally release people who are not guilty of violent crimes?
Well, I mean, I think, in reading back to, Sir Edward Coke and some of the legal history that I've been reading over the last 2,000 years, That's been the scenario. But really, when we use the word cash bail, we mislabel what bail is. Bail is the personal surety system, which means historically it has been, I am putting up for Robert. I am promising with a financial guarantee that Robert will be there and do what Robert is supposed to do. There was never the expending of funds in advance. And arguably bail agents are, and I think the Supreme Court has said this, are an extension of the personal surety system because we don't charge 100%. We charge a fraction and then we put up, the entire financial guarantee. The distinction historically, and I think of what should happen in New York, is judicial discretion. Defendants should be able to request bail if they want it and they don't want to have all their other liberties saddled. Prosecutors should be able to request bail to guarantee, under Stack versus Boyle, the purpose of bail, which is setting it at a figure reasonably calculated to ensure the appearance of the defendant. So I think, unfortunately, nobody on either side is going to like that answer. But that's what judges have been doing for a long time. And in particular in New York, by never considering dangerousness. Dangerousness has never been a factor in New York, and they've never authorized preventative detention. And so I think the system works pretty well. And I think the numbers bear that out. I mean, if you look at New York as the size of a bail market, it's small, quite small for the size of the population, which tells me that the system, despite the alleged abuses, was actually performing fairly well and needed some adjusting on some of these low-level cases like the Khalif Browder case, et cetera. But that on the whole, the system was probably performing pretty well.
New York is experimenting with this policy of accelerated discovery, Jeff. Is there a danger in overdoing this and having basically a speedy trial at the expense of a careful execution of justice?
I think so. And I've certainly heard that from law enforcement and prosecutors, that the burden's just too high, that we've kind of overdone it in the sense that, what was the problem that we were trying to solve? Were there all these discovery abuses by the police? Were they so widespread that we wanted to apply this draconian rule to all cases rather than making it an option when a criminal defense lawyer either wanted something or had reason to believe that the police were concealing evidence? I hadn't seen that as a big problem. Obviously, I focus on bail and not discovery, but I've heard that the police are hamstrung, that we're not getting to resolution, that they're having to dismiss cases because they don't have the resources to comply with these laws. So I think they need to be changed. And I think that's, unfortunately, it's being conflated with the bail issue and just being called criminal justice reform, but they're two entirely separate issues. And incidentally, law enforcement, many law enforcement in New York don't care about the bail reform law. They care more about the discovery law, but you wouldn't know that if you just say, well, where's everybody on criminal justice reform?
Is the idea of a presumption of openness then a non sequitur?
No, I guess you just have to define what we mean by openness. And I think, the rules in place for what criminal defendants are able to see, and certainly, the law of Brady versus Maryland, that, any link in the chain of offense of evidence used to convict a defendant is discoverable. That prosecutors are under a burden to disclose inculpatory or exculpatory evidence to the defense. So I think that is the definition of openness. I think there's other avenues to hold the police and prosecutors accountable. And I think, while there are abuses, as I've said, I don't think it's as widespread as perhaps, others might. But again, I'm not an expert on this area.
Many politicians, Mayor de Blasio, Governor Cuomo, are reversing their positions almost virtually constantly in regard to this particular issue of openness, of bail, of plea bargaining. Do we need some sort of generalized national meeting, construct, convention, where we talk about how we'll do things over these 50 states?
I mean, it would be helpful. I mean, obviously we have, National Center for State Courts, all kinds of various policy groups that have these continuing conversations, but it would be really cool to have a national summit on bail and pretrial release. And I would probably pay to sponsor that and have people lay their, best arguments on the table and try to find best practices. There's a group called the Uniform Laws Commission that's been working on this for the last 2 years. I've attended the meetings to try to find some best practices. But it's really kind of weak at this point. I mean, people really aren't talking about how to create a national model that makes more sense. And frankly, a lot of local jurisdictions would never go for it. They like the way the system works. They want to keep it. Example, St. Louis. In St. Louis, lawyers lien their own clients' funds and get their own clients' bail funds before the case is completed. So do they want to eliminate 10% of the court cash bail? No, they don't, because that's how they get their fees paid. So there's going to be a lot of local resistance on this if we were to create a national model. But I think it's time. It's time to have a national bail summit and try to get this conversation going.
We've been talking about those great and wondrous things that are possible and hopefully permissible in the future. We're within 30 seconds of our second break. When we come back, we possibly can talk about the activities of the American Bail Coalition presently, the ideas that you have, Jeff, for changes, the ideas that you have for your own personal future, and perhaps writing that book that we brought up during previous programs. This idea of bail in the American justice system is a question that has many tails and no ends. We'll be back in a few seconds. My name is Robert. The program is Seldom Said.
Rome once fell, and all great civilizations do. Is America falling? Could we be doing more? Some say it's because we have stopped focusing on learning and understanding what it means to be a good citizen. That's what this podcast is all about. If civics is dead, what happens next? Subscribe to Civics is Dead on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast app of choice, or visit wcwp.org/civicsisdead.
This is Seldom Said with Robert Amato.
Welcome back. We're into our last segment of a discussion of the American bail situation. Our special guest is Mr. Jeff Clayton, the Executive Director of the American Bail Coalition. Jeff, if we could segue into discussing the impact of bail on plea bargaining, and as to whether plea bargaining is something that in the city of New York, they've been talking about eliminating it, but is it something that it's going to be totally unnecessary if we have a proper bail scenario created?
Well, bail definitely has an impact on plea bargains. Not being able to post bail probably has the biggest impact on plea bargains because people want to get out of jail and they may plead even if it's a close case. And in some cases when they didn't even do it because they already have prior convictions, and one more misdemeanor conviction is not going to make a difference. And the one interesting thing that we want to get statistics on is what is the impact of a system of preventative detention on plea bargains. And what we think is happening in New Jersey is that because they're filing preventative detentions motions in a majority of cases, and then they're dismissing quite a huge number of those people are pleading guilty. And so the hammer of saying we're going to lock you up and throw away the key and not do bail, is a problem. So in the future, what will happen, I think, obviously, as Chief Justice Rehnquist said, liberty should be the norm. Obviously, that hasn't happened since 1984 in the federal system. We tripled incarceration, but liberty should be the norm. And the more people can be out of jail, fighting their case, and enjoying the presumption of innocence, I think the better. And if people aren't guilty, we can't force them to go to treatment. We can't force them to, do the criminal intervention that we think is going to work. So it definitely has a big impact on pleas. And it'll be interesting to see how, things play out in New York under the new system.
If you were standing at the admissions office of a law school and saw students coming in, Jeff, what might you tell them to advise them as to how they should approach situations like this and the areas of the law you would love to see them specialize in?
Well, I would tell a lot of them not to go to law school because a lot of the people that go for the wrong reasons. They go either because they have a large ego, because they've seen things on TV, or for financial reasons. And frankly, getting a business degree will make a lot more money in the law. One of my mentors, Chief Justice Malarkey, said the highest calling for a lawyer is public service. And certainly that was the first part of my career was public service. But you have to get into the guts of the operation and see how things work. And when you see that changes your whole picture of what the system is, because you assume that there's time in all these criminal cases to properly understand the facts. And I've told many a story on this show and others about how that just doesn't happen, that the system doesn't have the ability to have the individual consideration that we want. So, and I would encourage people to go into criminal law on both sides of it to look at how we can improve the system. And certainly there's a movement to put, progressive prosecutors in office to get changes. But, I would tell any law school student that, this is a journey of justice. It's not one where your ego is going to or should increase, that you're going to be some high roller. And that, even though I've been on, almost every major national network, I'll be putting on my hoodie and going to get on the train to Philadelphia this afternoon, and I'm not going to roll around like I'm some high flyer. And, I think a little humility goes a long way. And as my former mentor, Judge Kane, once said, hubris is what is destroying the legal profession. And that's something that, I think everybody needs to look at.
Your statement about not going to law school struck a nerve. I have any number of students who are in the law school situation, and they've questioned me on occasion as to when they'll be understanding the law. They're basically just memorizing and recounting. Do you feel that we possibly could have a situation where law school becomes, at least in its first 2 years, a laboratory that simply guides students in the community while they're preparing?
Yeah. Oh, sorry to interrupt. Yeah, so, my view on law school is not a popular one, but legal education is worthless the way it's set up right now. The only reason I succeeded was really two things. One, I was on the debate team for 10 years. I learned how to get into the debate, have the debate, be comfortable, basically losing and being made to look like a fool and getting used to the fact and getting a hard skin and all of that. When I went to law school, I never went to law school except for the first year. And the first year, you're right. I mean, it's really just memorizing a bunch of stuff, all of which in the modern era, you don't need to memorize. You can just pull up. So I think, yes, we need to learn about civil rules and have some courses. But the second reason why I succeeded is I had 3 jobs through the rest of it. I worked for a federal judge. I was clerking for an attorney. I was doing volunteer stuff to try to learn how the actual business of the law and how the courtroom works and all that sort of thing. So I would make it a more practical exercise because, the problem is some people just don't have it. They can memorize all the stuff, but when you put them in the courtroom, they can't do it. When you put them in a stressful negotiating system, they can't handle it. And it would be nice for people to know whether they can handle it long before they spent hundreds of thousands of dollars and gone into debt. So I would fundamentally remake legal education if it were up to me.
So that first scene in Paper Chase where Professor Kingsfield tells his students, you come to me with a mind full of mush, and when you leave, you're lawyers. You buy that as Hollywood and nondescript and not meaningful at all.
Yes, and this whole Socratic method that's inherent in many law schools of just putting people on the spot and embarrassing them and all this sort of thing, it doesn't matter. That's so far gone in our current world and it's ineffective. And I don't think, I can't point to any class in law school other than jurisprudential theory where I felt like I actually learned something. And jurisprudential theory is an interesting course because what you're talking about is the organization of the legal system, right? The idea of, how do we criminalize things? When do we have an administrative state? When do we not? All that sort of thing I actually learned something from. But yeah, the mind is still mush. Let's just put it that way.
Are you a believer in returning to an older time, that story of Hamilton studying with a judge, as you did, and learning from them? In point of fact, in some way being mentored. Is mentoring the answer? It
is. And, as I told you before, I had 3 great mentors, who I refer to as the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. And these guys were my Trinity. One was a federal judge. One was a Chief Justice of the Colorado Supreme Court. And the other one was just a darn good lawyer that knew those guys from back in the day when they were all on the debate team at East High School in Denver, Colorado. So, you learned all aspects of it from how the federal system operates, how the state system operates, and how, to be professional. And as, Michael Kahn just told me, the one thing that you have that you got to keep going is you're always going to be professional when you go through these. And what being a professional means, that when you're mad at another lawyer, you just put it aside and act professionally. And so proper mentoring is the key. And frankly, I wish I had some time to mentor a few students and just get them going on the right path, because the answer isn't in the library. I can tell you that right now.
One argues on the part of professional poker players that the answer is at the table. Do you feel that part of the lesson should be learning how to play the game?
Absolutely. Absolutely it should. And I think, it's when to fight, when not to fight, how to negotiate, all these sorts of things in the law. But the important thing is justice, and I used to be criticized early in my career for getting to the result the judge wanted to get rather than pushing the envelope as far as I could for my client, right? I could have gotten more if I pushed harder for my client than what I thought was just. And so, that getting in the game and actually, trying it out and all this sort of thing. And I wish people could go try it out before they went to law school. Certainly a lot of us do who are on, speech and debate teams. We realize, okay, we either have it or we don't. And people figure that out pretty fast. But it's just sad that, you can go to a liberal arts college, have no speaking experience or ability, and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars only to get out and realize I can't do this, or that you can't take the stress, because it's a very stressful job.
I would certainly subscribe to that. It would seem that you can major in anything, and I found this in some of the better universities in the country. Being a doctor, one majors in the sciences and bio and biochem. Being a lawyer, one can major in virtually any subject at all. It seems inane.
I think so. I mean, it's just, again, I point back, and we were having this conversation, I guess it was with my Lyft driver yesterday, that my undergraduate degree, I love my alma mater. It's a fantastic place. I had a wonderful time, but I don't really remember anything from undergraduate except, I won the National Junior Debate Tournament in 1995. That's it. And I was on the debate team. I was up all night working on briefs for debate and learning how to advocate. And, I remember the first time I debated Harvard, and I left with my tail between my legs, and I wanted to quit, but I didn't. And I kept coming back, and I kept coming back. In my senior year, we were 2-1 against Harvard. So, you have to go through that process of almost being beaten down mentally and emotionally if you're going to be an effective advocate. Because, look at my job now. I'm not popular. Everybody says I'm a tool for a racist industry. That's a hard label to have and to reconcile, and to still get up every morning and fight. But that's what it takes, right, is going through it in the past.
This is a strange segue, perhaps, in the next question. But when you talk about experientially dealing with success and failure, are we also flirting with the idea of courses that don't require a grade?
Yeah, I don't even understand why we really have grades anymore. I mean, you're either competent to move forward or you're not. You either learn the stuff or you didn't. And I don't think this whole idea that we're going to base everything on whether you got a 3.5 or a 3.8 or any of this stuff really matters. Certainly that's the case at Yale Law School, which is the only law school I'm familiar with that doesn't have grades. You get a pass or fail. And so, yeah, I don't think these gradations in law school mean anything. I'm a much better lawyer than people who got a lucrative job outside of law school and got a summer associateship and all that. I'm a much better lawyer than many of them. But it's only because of the background, not because I got a B, in civil procedure.
You've raised something that deals with a kind of self-reflection, Jeff. When one simply stands there in the essence of their own presence and decides whether they are acceptable and successful or not, what are your personal criteria for being a good lawyer? For your saying, and I agree with your assumption, that you are a superb litigator. What are the basics?
Well, I think you've got to be comfortable that you've done everything you can to put your client's message in the best light. That you, and you're not going to be unethical in what you do. You're not going to misrepresent things, but you're going to be as effective of an advocate as you can, and that you're not going to turn away when it gets hard. And it does. You'll have some difficult cases where you don't believe in the client, you don't believe in the issue, but that's not your job. Your job is to get your client's best arguments out there and let the judicial system and the judges tell us what they believe justice is in any of these particular cases. So I think it's just being the best advocate you can is really what it's all about.
In summarizing a lot of what we've been talking about, how then does the American Bail Coalition avoid the politicization of the legal system and virtually all aspects of society it seems that no matter what we say and do, we're afflicted and affected by passions rather than fact.
I don't think we can. My strategy is to ignore it and to not take it personally. Because I know that the right to bail is important and that it should be kept around. And it predates slavery in this country. It predates all of this stuff. And how to reconcile that in the modern era is what we're grappling with right now. But I think in our, folks at the American Bail Coalition, what we've said is we're not going to be partisans. We're not going to say we're Republicans. We're not going to say we're Democrats. We're not going to say we're socialists. We're not going to label ourselves because we're a one-issue coalition. We believe in the fundamental right to bail, and we think we should be a part of that. And you've just got to put all the noise that's out there and all the criticisms, and certainly I get criticized all the time, every day, by somebody, whether it's one of the 15,000 bail agents that follow us on Facebook, or whether it's being called racist by people on the other side. And, that's hard to deal with. It's the modern era that we're in, where we're not respectful of each other's opinions and all this sort of thing. But I'm not playing that game. I'm not getting into that because, I just feel like we're better than that and we should be better than that.
We're within 3 minutes of the end of what, again, has been an informative program. Would you ever consider, Jeff, stepping away and entering the realm of politics?
I have thought about it. I mean, during the last cycle, some opportunities popped up. But, I have certain requirements of things that I'm going to want. And in that particular time, the thing I was really focused on was hate crimes. I wanted something done on hate crimes. But I don't think, I might be a good candidate. I think I'm a better advisor. And so, I'd love to go, work for the Justice Department or the White House. And me, I could work for a Democrat or a Republican. I could even work for, America's first orange president. So, I'm willing to serve at some point. And I think at some point I probably will.
I must ask you, as I've asked you before, as I've asked you about segueing into politics before, is there a book lying in a drawer in your desk that you hope to finish?
There is. And I actually, I was inspired last time we talked to get writing and tell, the real story of, one, my life story, how I got into this, and two, how on a shoestring budget, we fended off a system that the ACLU and that everybody opposed in the 80s that was being thrown at this country again. And I'm proud of that. And we did it on a shoestring budget, as I said. And I want to tell the story of how we did it. And I told my colleague who's helping me co-write the book that when we hired him, the only way we're going to win is brick by brick. That's how you build a house. And we want to tell the story of how we did that, because we know every little thing that happened along the way was another brick that got us to this endpoint, that locking people up without bail and using a risk assessment to do it was not the right answer. And, and I'm proud of that. It's taken 5 years to get here, but I think we finally have.
Are you optimistic that your book will have a last chapter?
Yeah, I am. I am optimistic. Talking to, some folks I know in the media, they said, Jeff, just be aware, it's probably not going to be a bestseller. And I said, that's fine. As part of my job with the American Bail Coalition, I just want to tell the story. And I think hopefully the last chapter, we'll be working on even a bigger issue and solving some important societal problem and leaving some kind of a legacy, when I'm gone.
Last 40 seconds of our discussion for today. To those in the listening audience who have contacted me, law students, who've been curious about their approach to all of this, some final words on your part to them.
Well, don't give up. Don't give up, and don't worry about it. Don't worry about whether you're going to be a prosecutor or a corporate lawyer or this or that or sort of thing. The best advice I got was, when an opportunity comes, take it, even if it's not the right fit right now. And eventually, over time, you'll settle into where you belong and you'll end up at the right place. And if you would have told me I was going to be doing this job and I was going to be on the PBS NewsHour last week taping in Denver on the story of bail reform, I would have told you were crazy. But I'm proud of that now. And I think of all the different twists and turns that I've taken to get here. But I would say, stay strong, go through it, and take what opportunities come, even if that's not where you originally saw yourself or was the reason you even went to law school in the first place.
We'd like to thank Mr. Jeff Clayton for his return again. It was expository, it was enlightening, it was informative, it was everything that a discussion should be. Thank you, Jeff. The program has been Seldom Said. My name is Robert. Be with us again next time.